Good morning and welcome to Frontiers of Knowledge segment of Dr. Lamba's Awakening. You must have been amazed that I'm going to talk about the human brain, and you must be shocked by when I say that in the last 2 centuries, or rather in the last few centuries, human brains have become smaller, they have shrunk. Now, we have always been thinking that we are much more brainier, capable than our ancestors were. In fact, our modern civilization may be the most advanced to ever exist on this earth. But if you look at the 100 generations, then you would find that the brains of your ancestors were much larger than your brain. Human ancestors had a brain because of various reasons, several thousand years back. Humans reached a milestone in their history. The first known complex civilization started to emerge. And the people walking around and meeting the world's earliest cities, if you go to Carthage, Delhi, Ankara, Cairo, Mexico, wherever, you would find the people walking around and meeting in the world in the earliest cities would have been familiar in many ways to the what we as urbanites are doing today. And then human beings started actually shrinking slightly, imperceptibly. Maybe the shrinkage was not noticed. But then curiously, while the shrinking, the volume was taking place, the grooves in the brain were getting deeper and deeper. So the lost volume must be roughly equivalent to that as 4 ping pong balls. Now this is at Dartmouth College in the USA, Professor Jeremy G. Silva is an anthropologist. He has studied the human being shrinkage for the last 3,000 years back, not more than that. But then the moment we say that 3,000 years the human being's brain have shrunk by 4 ping pong balls, you can well imagine. As a matter of fact, if you look at instead of 3,000 years, 30,000 years, then we must have shrunk much more. And then what would happen if the shrinkage continues? And the question is, why did it happen? First thing that happened was that the agriculture emerged between 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. And plant cultivation started about 23,000 years back. So then the sprawling civilizations, architecture, machinery followed. First writings came at that age, and that is what the problem started. As a matter of fact, the size of the brain really reveals about the animal's intelligence or cognitive skills. And when the writing was not there, people used to use their brain much more. Now they don't use it. And if you see, the fall is going to be more steep now, because we have stopped using the brain and we are depending on computers to do our thinking for us. And now with the robotics coming in, maybe human beings will be consigned as museum pieces. And the researchers are scratching their head. It is an animal's intelligence that is on cognitive ability in general. And the species have larger brain than ours, and a greater intelligence which we don't have. In many ways, the animals are much more capable. Say weather forecasting. They don't depend on the instruments and technology and study of the clouds, anything, but then they have it. So what exactly prompts the brain to get bigger or smaller is difficult to know. But it's enough that our brains have reduced. And then what happens? They compared the human beings to the ant societies, because the ant societies share similarities with our own life. Amazingly, there are no ant species which has practiced a large form of agriculture. Now you'll be amazed at that the human societies indulge in agriculture, and so ants do. The nests of the ants have been found to have fungus growth, which was deliberate, not natural. And their brains are getting larger and larger because they do not depend on the artificial aids. These ants gather leaves and other plant materials to use in the form before harvesting the fungus to eat. Now, that was one thing, the growth of so-called civilization. And as I always say, as civilization advances, culture goes back. But here it was not only the culture, it was the human capacity. Then, the second thing that happened was writing. When the people had to remember things, they would use their brain. Writing, they put on the paper and forgot about it. They didn't have to remember it. So the capacity of the brain to store facts reduced. The folklore, the storytelling arts were lost. The earliest form of communication, say the Vedas and the Qurans and everything, that was all verbal transmission. When the writing came in, that verbal transmission reduced. And naturally, when you don't use the brain, it has to go into cold storage. And that's why the animals are getting sharper and sharper brains than human beings. Now, as I said earlier, that when the volume is reducing, the grooves are getting deeper. Grooves are the things to do. Even to operate a computer, you need to think and know the processes. So, in other words, what happens is that if the so-called civilization had not been there, the human brains would have been sharper. But then, the animal intelligence would have been sharper, but not the cognitive, but not the civilization's benefits would have been there. Secondly, the population increased. And according to the anthropologists, when you have a threshold of the population, the larger the population, the less brain you use, because ultimately brain is collective of intelligence. So the emergence of writing, which occurred about 2000 years before the reduction in human brain set in, had its effect, as I said. And then people didn't have to remember. People didn't have to think. But then they started remembering by rote, so progress was slow. And as we are coming to that era when everything is on our phone, that need even to remember the phones is not there. Today the people don't remember the phone numbers of their nearest ones. And there was a time when you remembered everything. So it influenced the brain volume through externalizing information. We started externalizing information which we were earlier internalizing it. And when you internalize, you need when you want to keep something, store something, you need a larger core. The more information you have, the larger the vessel has to be. And when you don't use the vessel, you say, why have it? So automatically the shrinkage takes place. And 4 ping pong balls shrinking in 200 years is not a very healthy thing. Now, you would say that, is it proved? Yes, it has been proved, though proof is not empirical. The researchers have studied at a UK biobank. There is a UK biobank. It is a vast biomedical database that contains, among other things, brain scans and IQ tests of thousands of people. 13,600 people were selected for the size, for the brain size and IQ combined. A behavioral geneticist at British University Amsterdam in Netherlands did it. And looking at those brain scans of the 13,600 people, it was seen that there was a gradual shrinking, just a millimeter, half a millimeter, but then it was there. And the study found, and interestingly, that the bigger brain was on average associated with doing slightly better on IQ tests. But crucially, the relation was not deterministic. It was non-deterministic. That means that there were some people who did very well in the test despite having relatively small brains, and vice versa. Now here also, the brain have a structural differences that are meaningful in terms of a person's general cognitive ability than the sheer size of brain. Quite possible. A person may have a small brain and still he may be able to have creative thinking and cognitive analytical thinking much more than the person with a larger brain has. And there's the ugly history in the Western world. You can't deny it. The eugenic movement and those sorts of things that have been based on ideas called biodeterminism. This biodeterminism shows a correlation, but it destroys that. The brain scans have revealed a certain information of the structure of people's brain, not just the size. And people have seen relationship between the volume of the gray matter, the outer layer, which has a particular number of high neurons, and there is a structural difference. And that is meaningful in cognitive ability. It would be crazy to think, I agree, that volumes can explain the entire difference. They cannot. Now, they say the Einstein's brain was not that big. And there are some people in the United States who had much bigger brain. Maybe their genius has gone haywire. Professor Simon Cox at the University of Edinburgh has done a lot of things, and he thinks that we have to ignore it, but when the people say that women have smaller brains than men have, there is logic in that. The size of the women, the brain is, dependent on the total structure of the body. And if you are a small structured person, your brain would be small. But here, interestingly, the grooves in female brain are much deeper, so they have better analytic skill than men have. So, but men, because of their sheer physical power, always run on women saying that they have lesser brains, while they have larger brains. And then there are many features on the face of brain that affect cognitive ability. As I said, volume itself is not enough. One example is myelinations. This refers to the sheath of the material that surrounds axons, the long thin cables, nerves, that allow neurons to connect to the other cells and form a neural network. And they have seen that brains have shrunk, and they actually started shrinking 3,000 years back. So maybe that's why we see that in the old age, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Iliad, Odyssey, which was all oral tradition, people had much more skills, brains. And when people age, the myelin breaks down, reduces the efficiency of the brain, and you can detect this change by studying how easily water diffuses across the brain tissues. But the structural makeup of a particular brain has a reference on the person's intelligence. It's also worth noting that some people have partial brains due to injury or quirks in development, and yet seem surprisingly unaffected. One man in France was successful career civil servant, was found to be missing 90% of the brain, and yet had the IQ score of 75 and a verbal IQ of 84. slightly better, slightly larger in fact, than the average French score of 97. So while the volume has decreased, the efficiency of brain has not decreased. That's something to be noted. The volume, because it's not needed, will decrease. Efficiency, because you use it for other purposes, has not decreased. And that is quite interesting. As a matter of fact, another reason, according to M.E. Belenov of Hopkins University, is that the brain tissues require a lot of energy to grow. And think of the parasitic creatures that rely on relatively stable environment and resources. And then they have very small brains, just a few millimeters long, for example, some parasites. But their attaching capabilities are superb. So human babies are actually born with excess of neurons. Now this is amazing. When a child is born, he has 100 billion neurons. And as the child develops, the number of neurons decreases. The brains haven't actually changed. Their bodies just got smaller, and this applies to the birds and everybody, and so does it to the human beings. So a child needs more neurons because he is more instinctive. He is not cognitive. He is not thinking. He is not analyzing. He is just instinctive. He is just gut approach. Laughs when he has to laugh, when he sees something funny. Doesn't bother for what should be there and what should not be the society norms. But as he grows, the number of the neuron decreases. In humans, one area of brain that makes us is our neocortex, which is involved in higher cognitive functions, conscious thought, language processing, and everything. And the reduction in brain has not reduced that function. As I said, volume. And then if we compare it to what our ancestors had, they were much more instinctive. And their larger volume, in fact, helped them get out of the sticky situations. And a lot of animals have benefited from having to step up their cognitive prowess in world are full of challenges. Are you aware that the birds have colonized oceanic islands and they adapted to the unpredictable new territory? Human beings cannot adopt that because instinctively they start analyzing. So while it's beneficial on the one side, it's not so useful on the other side. But one thing is sure and determined, that as our reliance on the external sources, as our externalization of all information increases, our brain would get smaller because the need to use that brain is smaller. So if your brains are getting smaller, that's not a cause to worry, but it does show that you are not using it absolutely the way. If you're not using it, standing water starts stagnating. Here, they start shrinking. So take your pick. Of course, as a part of the modern society, you don't have much. You have a Hobson's choice. You cannot be Rip Van Winkles to go back to the life 50 years back, 60 years back, 100 years back. No. But you have to accept the fact and as much as possible try to internalize information, not only externalize it. Thank you.